Frontline Conversations, leading the debate since 1984.
Hello everyone, I'm Yuvan and welcome to Frontline Conversations. Today we are joined by Professor Pankaj Sekhsaria, who has compiled this extraordinary and crucial book called The Great Nicobar Betrayal. And it is about the project on the Great Nicobar Island which the government is proposing and the problems with it and why we should perhaps look at it very critically. Um, Pankaj, would you tell us what's happening in Great Nicobar? What's the problem?
Perhaps one of India's most pristine and most beautiful and most precious landscapes, which is also very, very, very geologically sensitive. So the islands sit on the ring of fire, and we have regular earthquakes in that landscape. So what is proposed in this project is, in a recent statement in Parliament, the minister said that formally, officially, they propose to cut down about 1 million trees in this one single island, which is also home to indigenous communities that have been here for thousands of years. So, from an ecological perspective, from the rights of the indigenous people, from the geological concerns, there are multiple concerns which we've put together in this book, which Frontline has published. And the hope, like you said, is to be able to raise concern and to actually convince the government that this is not a project that we should go ahead. Whatever is proposed as the benefits, I don't think they're going to accrue. And even if they did, what is at stake is absolutely irreplaceable.
I think what is great about this book is it's a book produced around this specific environmental campaign. And what is important about it, I think, is that this pristine landscape has not been experienced by or visited by most people. So it's very difficult to sort of feel about this space. And this book allows one to understand what's at stake. And I mean, before we go into technical details, perhaps if you can tell us a little about the ecology of this place, the species, the people.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So, like I said, it's 900 and odd square kilometers of very pristine tropical rainforest, with a large number of species, botanical plants and animals, which are extremely rare. They are very unique, endemic species found nowhere else on planet Earth. I forget the numbers now, but it's there in the documents in terms of what the species have been recorded in this one single island. And even today, it remains largely unexplored. So, any serious, detailed kind of expedition that goes to the island does find out something new. If I might just highlight a couple of maybe let's say the most spectacular species and the more important ones that are more visible, there is the Nicobari megapode, that is an endemic to the Nicobar Islands. It's found nowhere else on planet Earth. It's a small chicken-sized bird, flightless bird that you find on the coastline largely of the island. It nests in the coastline, and has very interesting nesting behavior because it is a ground nesting bird, and a significant portion of its most important breeding habitat is going to be taken over by the project. So it's a bird I've had an opportunity to see, and I remember this conversation with you in Pune about a year ago, and when you asked about the importance of place, and you were just mentioning that. And I think that's very important because I recognize and I realize that I've done this book, and the writing is because I've been to that place. I have seen it. I have had the experience of walking in those rainforests and seeing what that place is. Also to see turtles nest on the beaches over there. So the giant leatherback turtle, and that's the other species I wanted to mention to you about, the largest of sea turtle species on planet Earth, and the Andaman and Nicobar Islands and Great Nicobar, where this project is coming up, is perhaps one of the most important nesting sites of this turtle in the entire northern Indian Ocean. So the turtle does not nest on the beaches of mainland India. So where India is concerned, we only find them in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And Galathea Bay, where this port project is going to come up, is one of the most important nesting sites of the giant leatherback turtle. So, and like I said, I've had the opportunity of seeing this turtle in the pitch of the night on a remote island, and it really does something to us. And then one feels extremely concerned and worried when a project of this kind is proposed, because it will take out the entire bay from any use that the turtle can kind of do. So these are just samples. There are a number of smaller species which are endemic, which are extremely unique that you find on that island, on that particular island, in addition to the fact that there are other species on the chain of islands, which also might be affected if this project comes up.
Yeah. I think this book beautifully evokes the landscape for us. You know, there are essays by ecologists, by lawyers, speaking about the whales, dugongs, the saltwater crocodiles, the leatherback turtles. And you know, one of the reasons why this project has come under heavy fire is because of the lack of environmental due diligence. I just remember reading this bit from the EIA about the Galathea Bay, that this nesting site for the leatherback turtle is going to be taken over, and they're going to keep signboards for the turtles to sort of go around and nest somewhere else, as if turtles can read. What is wrong with the environmental due diligence process which has been followed?
So, you know, it's astonishing the kind of violation of the environmental process. So, on the surface, on paper, one does see that all boxes have been ticked. But you go into the process that has been followed, and I'll give you a couple of examples. So, one is in January of 2021, if I remember right, the Ministry of Environment and Forests released a Marine Turtle Action Plan, in which the Environment Minister signs off on a document in which Galathea Bay, this beautiful 12 square kilometer bay where the turtles nest, has now been identified and says that it is one of India's most important turtle nesting sites. So, in that Marine Turtle Action Plan, that site is recognized as an important nesting site. But just 15 days earlier, 15 days before this Marine Turtle Action Plan has been signed off onto by the minister, under his own watch, the National Board for Wildlife, the premier body to look at wildlife issues in the same ministry, has already said that it is okay to denotify a wildlife sanctuary in that very bay because this port project has to come up. So, on the one hand, one might argue that it has gone through the process, but it is completely unacceptable because you are, on the one hand, saying that this is important, on the other hand, this happens. Then, if you look at the EIA report, which is at the heart of the environmental clearance process, about 1,000 odd pages, and it is an atrocious document, Yuvan. We were discussing about this yesterday, and I gave examples of the shoddiness of the scientific work, of the language in the report, of the way documents and information has been picked up, the wrong information, the incorrect information, and the language in that is also so problematic, sometimes hilariously funny, but because extremely unfortunate, because that is the basis on which a 160 square kilometer landscape with a billion trees are going to be lost by work that is of the shoddiest kind of nature. So, one sees again that one might have said the process has been followed, but there has been no rigor, there has been no concern. Similarly, when the environmental clearance has been granted, like you mentioned about turtles, there is one condition, for instance, which says one of the conditions for clearance is that the trees with nesting holes of owls will be identified, they will be geotagged, and then the trees will be protected if possible. So it is an absolutely meaningless condition, because one is that it is not going to protect anything, it's just about documenting, and it's an impossible thing to do anyway, and it does not achieve anything at all. So that's on the one side. On the other, we look at what's happening with the tribal communities. So the tribal welfare agencies that are mandated with the job of protecting these people, we have the Shompen and the Great Nicobaris, the Nicobari community, have actually said on paper that we will facilitate the denotification of the tribal reserve for the project to come up. So repeatedly one sees that almost everything that is important and relevant has been violated.
I remember in the environmental impact assessment that the people carrying out the study are saying the forest is so dense, it's so diverse, we couldn't even see what is there, we couldn't even understand the number of species in the canopy, they themselves owning to the fact of mind-boggling diversity there.
Absolutely.
Could you tell us about why, you know, climatically and geologically this is a really bad place to have such a big sort of a developing a modern city in a remote island? You know, there was the tsunami's epicenter nearby, and
Absolutely.
a little more about that.
Yeah, so I just do a little. So if you look at my hand here, and Andaman's in the north and Nicobar in the south. So what happened in December 2004, exactly 20 years ago, when the tsunami happened, and we know the kind of impact and the damage the tsunami caused. But what happened before the tsunami, the earthquake that caused the tsunami, an earthquake of 9.3 on the Richter scale. So when the earthquake hit, Andaman's in the north and Nicobar in the south, the islands tilted like a seesaw would tilt in a child's playground. So the Andaman Islands came up that morning by about 4 feet, and the Nicobar Islands, Indira Point, the southernmost tip of Great Nicobar, saw a permanent subsidence of 15 feet. And actually, the cover of the book, so this lighthouse actually was above the high tide line. Today, this lighthouse stands in water. That is because this coastline has seen a subsidence of 15 feet. Now, you cannot imagine the scale of the change that is there. So, a 9.3 earthquake on the Richter scale releases energy worth, people say, many times the energy released when the atomic bomb was dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And this port project and this entire project is coming up exactly on this coastline. So you might be wanting to invest and you're talking of development, but what we are actually doing is increasing vulnerability. You might bring in 300,000 people, you will invest 40, 50,000, 60,000 crores, and tomorrow you have another earthquake, you have another tsunami, and all of this is gone. So, leave alone for a moment the ecological value, the biodiversity value, the rights of the indigenous people. Just from a sheer economic investment perspective, this seems to be the wrong place to invest. And these islands are on the ring of fire. The Andaman and Nicobar Islands on an average has one earthquake a week. Not of course of the same scale as that of 2004, but you never know when the next big earthquake will come. So it is putting everything at risk. You're putting money at risk, you're putting people at risk, you're putting the infrastructure at risk. And that is after you've destroyed, the billion trees cut, the forest gone, the species gone, the turtle loses nesting site. So from every angle, it just doesn't make sense.
I wonder if we can speak about the unrealistic aspect of the project. Just this morning I was looking at a website which projects sea level rise, and by 2050, where about a foot of sea level rise is predicted for that area. Much of the airport, for which now public hearing has been announced, is underwater. Much of that infrastructure in the coastal area is underwater, and there was another issue raised by Yuvan in this book, that you don't have enough drinking water to support so many people. And why is this a grandiose and unrealistic thing?
Absolutely. So I think there's a problem of vision there. What is it that we are seeking to do, and why do we want it? It's almost like we construct a big infrastructure project because we can construct a big infrastructure project. We're not really thinking this through. Let me give an example. Today, this particular island has a population of between 5 and 8,000 people. The project officially, formally says that by 2050, we will have 3.5 lakh people here. Now, that's a 4,000% increase in the population in 20-30 years. Now, that's not possible for any landscape to sustain. You mentioned water. Where will that water come from? What will happen to the garbage? What will happen to the needs of the people? So, I don't think it's even being planned well. And the entire island chain, Andaman and Nicobar, of 600 islands, of which about 35 have human populations, today, the total population is 5 lakh people. So for an entire chain of islands to have 5 lakh, and you say you will have 3.5 lakh people in one island, it just doesn't make any sense. Besides, I don't even know if it's actually doable. But even if a small part of this gets implemented, I think the damage that will be caused is what we are very concerned about. So one hopes nothing will happen, but they've really set the ball rolling. And like you mentioned in the beginning, clearance have been granted. The paperwork has all been done. It's all cleared up, and it's a matter of time before maybe work starts on the ground.
Okay. One of the excuses, as it were, if not a reason, one doesn't know, given by the government, is that this is for strategic purposes. And you see in India that a lot of places, what often the excuse of defense or strategic purpose is used to clear off large environmental sort of projects. And how true is that for Great Nicobar? One of the things you say in the book is that that does not hold water. Okay. Yeah.
So there are two, three things there, and actually it will be very nice if defense analysts and others also looked at it and kind of respond to our concerns. So one is that I have seen discussions on social media among, say, ex-defense people who, while might acknowledge the importance of this place strategically, uh, completely disagree that this is the best way to do it. This massive infrastructure and this huge construction, they say this is not the way to go about doing it. I think the second more important point is that this is not a defense project. You have a 40,000 crore transhipment terminal that is being proposed. So this is in no way a strategic project. It is not a defense project. It's an out and out commercial project. And then you have 100 odd square kilometers of the development of a township, where if you look at the proposal document, it talks about tourism, villas, all kind of infrastructure. So the argument of defense, even if it is there, is not part of this project. And even if this was to come up, like I was just saying and like we discussed, what is the risk that you're creating? Imagine you put up this infrastructure and there is an earthquake or a tsunami or something. So you're actually increasing vulnerability. And exactly like you said, we've seen this in the Himalayas in the last few years. What's being done in the name of both development and actually defense. The huge projects, road projects, dam projects. And we see the increasing vulnerability of that mountain range. So it's actually been such a damaging project in the last few years. Across Himachal and Uttarakhand. So the sinking of Joshimath, for example. So it's a very similar thing in that sense, except that I think the benefit we have in the Nicobars is that we've not started off yet. What we are seeing in the Himalayas is an outcome and a fallout of what's already been done. I think we should take lessons from there.
I'm just remembering the islands in the Maldives and the ministers of that country going underwater to have their conference because much of the islands are sinking fast. The Curacao Islands, other parts of Oceania, and somehow we have not learned. There's just
Absolutely. So there is a certain lack of concern, lack of understanding, and a lack of a historical dimension to the whole thing. So always we are seeing that these islands are being promoted and said, okay, we will create a new Hong Kong here, or we will create a new Singapore here. And the question is, just yesterday there was a senior academic in the event, and she said Singapore is deeply worried about what's happening there. They're worried about rising sea levels, and they're thinking of how to enclose themselves and protect themselves. But these are stories we don't get to know here. So can you really be a Singapore? Do you really want to be a new Singapore? What about being ourselves and developing of that kind? So I think that many levels. And as a matter of fact, a lot of the documents, this one not so much, but other development plans for the islands, do not even mention the earthquake of December 2004. And one of the technical documents, which describes and gives the rationale for the port over here, actually says that this coastline was not damaged in the tsunami of 2004, and that's why we can go ahead and do the project. And like we see, I was telling you in the cover of the book, and we have images in the book itself, that you've seen a lighthouse that was standing above the high tide line, now standing surrounded by the waters of the Andaman Sea. And how can that not be destruction? How can that not be a change that you have to consider? So it's really bizarre actually what's going on.
I mean, you have brought out in the book of how this archipelago is in fact so tectonically alive. It's sort of shifting and molding and it's so dynamic. To have something so permanent upon it, the landscape itself would not allow it perhaps.
Absolutely.
What are some other important things which people have to think around and perhaps even voice out about this issue?
So, I mean, I think we've broadly discussed many of these. I think the ecological dimension, the richness of the place, the rights of the tribal communities there. And I mean, that's very important also to, and I must mention that the tribal communities there were displaced when the tsunami hit that landscape. And that's 20 years now. And many of them actually want to go back to what was their old habitation and their old sites. And we're realizing now that the government may not want them to go back because at least some of those areas, which were original habitations of the people, are part of the project now. So this is a blatant violation of their rights. And initially they did give permission about saying we are okay with the project. But once it came to their notice that there is, it will deny them the chance of going back to their to their habitations. They have written a letter saying we withdraw our clearance, and they even say that we were lied to when the state spoke to us, and that entire letter is there in the book.
Okay.
So it's a very detailed letter written by what are known as the captains of the Nicobari community. So the head of the community there is called a captain. A few of them have gotten together and written a very detailed letter highlighting why that concern is there. So that's a serious concern. These have been people living there for thousands of years in reasonable, harmony with nature. They're small populations. It's absolutely fundamental that we respect their rights. A large part of Great Nicobar is a tribal reserve. And that's a very unique kind of legal framework. It has its limitations that are not there in most other parts of India. So we have something and we are kind of, undoing it. We have national parks, we have a biosphere reserve, a very beautiful coastline, a very rich ocean. You were mentioning yesterday, we know very little about what's in the oceans, leave alone the land. So that's one aspect. The geological concerns are very serious. We have to think about that. And we have to consider the economic viability of that place. So across all parameters, and then there is the issue of the lack of environmental governance. And why should that be acceptable? The way the process has been followed and yet not been followed, very seriously violated. And I mean, sorry, is this the last, like almost like the icing on the cake is they have said that 130 square kilometers of forest lost in Great Nicobar, we will compensate by declaring 260 square kilometers of forest in Haryana. So, what is the equivalence? In what way is it equivalent? So, it's just at every point we are being made a fool of. And that's why we call this book The Betrayal. And at various levels, it's just such a large betrayal. Everything that is valuable is being signed off.
I mean, there is the denotification of a wildlife sanctuary you speak about, I mean, highlight how there are multiple illegalities. Not following the Andaman Nicobar protection of Aboriginal
tribes
regulation, and then CRZ violations. Anything else you want to tell about the book and why people should read it, where they can get it?
So I think the book is available largely with Frontline, the Hindu group. It's available in a few stores. We're trying to get them into a few stores in different parts of the country. I think it'll be great if people picked up the book to show support, to understand, read what is there. So we have in the book 4 broad sections. The first section is the history of the project, in kind of some of the things that we were speaking about. The second section is on the ecological dimensions. So we have some very beautiful, very beautifully written pieces by a different set of ecologists and scientists on various aspects of the ecology of the place: birds, cetaceans, macaques, the Nicobari macaque. The third section talks of the indigenous people, 2 very detailed, very beautiful, very evocative, very heart-rendering kind of articles by Manish Chandi and Ajay Saini on what's happening with the tribal communities. And then we have a 4th very detailed piece by a very well-known lawyer, Norma Alvarez, who talks about some of the efforts to take this matter to court, largely to the National Green Tribunal, and how there has been a very problematic approach of the tribunal itself. And she's quite explicit to say what the tribunal is doing is not right. So, and then we have a lot of other information in the book about, say, a timeline of the project, some other annexures. So it will be really great if, a large number of people engaged with this and raised voices, because I think every voice does count. I mean, I think we are more and more thinking that individual voices don't count, but they do. So, writing to concerned authorities, writing more about the project, because there are many dimensions that have still not been investigated. Who's the project proponent, what's happening with the environmental conditions. So many aspects are still to be investigated, still to be written about. We've had great support with youth groups doing social media campaigns, and there's space for a lot more. So, I mean, this is just a kind of plea and a call, and like I was saying in the release in Bangalore, this book actually is a call for help. It's a very beautiful place, and in that sense, it's been very great, because that Frontline has done the book. actually a year and a half ago we did a special cover package called the Nicobar Nightmare. And that had about 8 or 10 stories, detailed stories, and that got a huge amount of traction. So it counts, and it can be made to happen.
Yeah.
So I just urge everybody to kind of read it and see what you can do about it, and
Yeah.
join the effort at protecting this place.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today, Pankaj, and educating us so crucially about this issue. I hope everyone watching will pick up the Great Nicobar Betrayal. It's powerful, moving, disturbing in all the right ways, evoking this very unique landscape which is unlike anything else in the world. It's available on the Hindu Group's website and other platforms. Please pick it up. Thank you so much.
Frontline Conversations. Leading the debate since 1984.